Yeah, today we are talking all about refi. So we are going to be regenerating the world and helping the local communities through crypto. And we do that through giving back and creating sustainable impacts and using communities locally and abroad to think locally but act globally. Next up, we have one of my favorite projects, Luminal Village. Roberto, how you doing?
Hey there, all good? How are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm here with Jillian.
Hi
Hello,
there.
Jillian. How's it going? Welcome
Good.
to the fest.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm kind of new to this community. I've been involved with permaculture and eco villages for over 30 years, getting to be an oldie. And around me, we have our team. And you just saw Roberto and his wife partner here is Laura.
Lauren?
And also Robert Hirschram from the Netherlands. We're at Liminal Village right now, and we're honored to be kicking off the Regenerative Day here in MetaFest. We've got a bodacious presentation prepared for you, which Roberto's going to start off. Then Robert's going to be speaking, and then myself and Laura, and back off to Roberto, because he's the one who's the most invested in this space, though I've been getting to know you a bit. But really, we're looking at how the eco community has been coming together with the Web3/refi communities, and there's a lot of potency, richness of patterns that we're exploring for co-creation and really ultimately regeneration. So we're happy to be moving into this presentation with you. So with that, I'll pass it over to Roberto.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Pleasure to meet you all. Okay, Roberto. So the floor is yours. You'll have 30 minutes. I believe you're sharing some slides. Yep, I can see them.
Yes, let me see. All right. So, as Jillian said, we're pretty honored to actually start the Regen Day. I think that regeneration is the most important aspect of our generation because, well, we know what they said is coming ahead, and it's better to leave a place better than how we found it. So I think that today what we're going to talk about is really a regenerative response. So as Bill Morrison, that is the co-founder of permaculture, says, is that we need to design sustainable human settlements that are able to preserve and understand the natural system, and that we need to do it as soon as possible. We need to do it today, and we cannot just leave it to government or corporates to actually do this. And one important aspect about what it says that is really in touch with the Web3 is that we need to have the fundamental freedom to choose the economic system in which we participate. And if we can't, then we don't have freedom at all. So one of the things that we're talking about here is regenerative. So in contrast to degenerative, so I see that as a spiral, one going downwards and one going upwards. So right now, our system, the system that we choose, the economic systems that we're born into, have been degenerative towards the planet. And what we need to do now is to find the right space and the right condition that is able to at least create that kind of upward spiral that is going to be able to regenerate the system. So we're not talking about sustainability anymore. We're talking about regeneration. So I think we are now at the big crossroads, and where indeed the degenerative system that is generating war and environmental destruction is on the left here in this configuration, and on the right there is this way of living that seems to be more aligned with nature. And mind you, it's not back to nature, it's forward to nature. So we need to go forward into it, bringing all the knowledge and the technology. And that's what's actually represented in the center of this piece, where you would see some some drawings on the wall. To me, that indicates the knowledge that is actually available from the indigenous community. But what we're here to discuss today is whether or not the Web3 is actually something that is written on the wall. So how can Web3 bring us from where we are to where we want to be? So if we zoom in, actually, I see some on the right, there is some community there. So my first questions, and it's a little bit of a provocation, is like, okay, if that's the future we want to see, where is crypto? So is it that these people that are over there are scanning some QR code and making some transaction and publishing this transaction through the entire planet so everybody can see that? Or was the crypto there so that this environment could be created and then it has been dropped off because now we can actually live naturally in line with nature? So that's just a question that maybe we can answer, or we can always keep wondering during our efforts. So right now, what I'm seeing, or the biggest trend, is kind of like replacing the mining paradigm of maybe Bitcoin to like, okay, let's just make people do things. So let's mine this other, that the mining is not about putting down a piece of plant or buying a piece of forest. And then we walk away with the token that is pretty much what money was. And through this token, in different ways, we're going to be able to actually get what we need. So I wonder if now, with the advent of Web3 technologies, we can actually put an end to that concept that money doesn't grow on trees. And apparently with Web3, we can actually make money grow on trees. Or if we actually need to completely replace that, and that's part of the provocation, that trees don't really grow on money neither. So when we're talking about regenerative financing and how to use Web3, and we're talking about tokens, we need to be very careful not to remind ourselves that actually trees grows on healthy ecosystems. And it's not crypto that is going to facilitate healthy ecosystems. It's actually the people on the ground. So, and coins could actually be a way to coordinate with each other. One thing that does work to regenerate and ecosystems is the technology of permaculture, which sees nature as a interconnected system and uses this interconnection to create that upward spiral that I was talking about. So this is one of the biggest example and the biggest scale example of the Luz Plateau, where in 14 years has been transformed from a desert to a thriving ecosystem, and using that functionality that is being added. So it's not about using fertilizers and pesticides and bringing in water with some airplane. This is as ecosystem that is being regenerated and is self-sustaining. So if we can do this regeneration, then you can imagine that the economic activity on a situation on the left side, on a desert, is really rough, while on the right you will see the market that is full of veggies. So everything actually in the economy is regenerated just by regenerating the ecosystem. So that's real value. So when we actually look at sustainable development goals and we look at them like this, in this flat and kind of siloed way, we should actually reframe them into where is the priority? Because otherwise it's like, well, we're focusing on this, on that, on that. Let's actually put them in 3D. And we realize that there are only four that actually are really focusing on the biosphere. And only on top of that, we can actually have a society, because without biosphere, we cannot. And on top of the society, we can have the economy. So let's keep this in mind when we're designing our systems. And I want to add also another thing. In a regenerated piece of land, or a traditionally farmed, because I mean, we call it traditionally farmed, but actually that is very recent, the farming that has been completely dependent on the petrochemical industry, starting from the tractor to the pesticides to the fertilizer, it's all petrochemical. So what are we going to do if that goes away? So the fact that we have this crisis ahead, and regenerative land does capture the CO2, while traditional farming, again, it actually releases it into the atmosphere. I'm actually really wondering, why is it that the government is not actually sponsoring and financing regenerative permaculture? So that's a big question, and I believe and trust in governments, because we are the ones that vote for them, and we are the ones that actually need to ask for what we need. But while we wait, what we need to do is really take the issue in our hand and hope for the future in the next 5 years at least that there's going to be an action also from the top down. So here's the idea of a regenerative network came. And I'm going to just pass the mic to Robert that is going to talk about pockets of sustainability.
Yeah, exactly. So what are we still waiting for, right? We can do so much, and we can take action with support of Web3 technology. So hi guys, great to be here. My name is Robert Schramm, and I'm a transition engineer at several transition platforms. And I'm here at Liminal Village to be active on a local level, to see how we can organize local networks, but also, of course, how we can create global networks. And I'm here to support the regenerative groups and projects on global levels. You can see here a map, for instance, like Global Eco Village. There are many maps and networks out there already, must be 1,000 probably. And we want to give you just a brief overview or an idea about what's going on. Here you can see, for example, the Transition Network, Numundo, Akosha. It's really, there are so many. We want to map the mappers to firstly give us an idea what is out there to make this visible. And so that's one of the first phases that we're into now, that we're really making visible how many groups are there, active groups, all kinds of villages that are purpose-driven or specifically not. And the next phase is that we want to connect all this data on the back end, because it's nice that everything is visible, but we need to connect this data so we can create feedback loops, and we can organize much more effectively and efficiently. And basically this shows the principle about if you want to scale it up. It's like, for instance, like a weather station. We just have measure point sensors, and we can measure, for instance, what kind of predictions we can expect with changing weather. So what we want to do is scale this up and sort of transition from a static model to a dynamic system with, of course, the Web3 community. And and we're weaving all these networks together, and I'm going to pass the torch over to Jillian.
Thanks, Robert. So essentially, we're focusing on co-creating a local network of interdependent projects, individuals and communities focused on integral regeneration. And notice that word integral. We'll get to that more in a little bit. This is a diagram that my colleague Naomi Joy Smith from New Zealand developed for the Permaculture Co-Laboratory, or the Permaculture Co-Lab that we both work in. And I came in and she'd already been mapping the co-lab in the center, but you can see that it's connected with many other organizations, groups, people all over. And really this is an international global community response that we're in. And a lot of what we're doing is starting to learn how to map these ecosystems. So this slide is taking that ecosystem that we showed in the previous slide and mapping it onto, say, a grassland ecosystem, and what might be the different roles or functions that different people or organizations are playing. So biomimicry is at the essence of permaculture design. And how can we mimic and understand nature so that we can bring it to how we understand, work with, grow, create organizations, etc. And when I teach permaculture, I talk a lot about this web work of interconnections. And really, permaculture is about that, is catalyzing and using nature as a model to develop this web work of interconnections. Because when we have that, we have a lot of resilience in our systems, which we don't necessarily have in the modern conventional mechanistic approach to developing the infrastructure. They provide a lot of our needs, but there's a lot of brittleness and also a lot of away that waste and other things go to that we haven't accounted for. So permaculture, I don't always use the term because a lot of people think it's just about agriculture and gardening. Excuse me. And while permaculture really is and has at its core that it's about permanent agriculture, we can also understand permaculture as permanent culture, permaculture. And that permaculture has an ethics where earth care has been the focus. And when I draw this, when I'm teaching in this Venn diagram, I make a really large circle for the earth care, with people care and fair share being much smaller circles, because we have traditionally focused in permaculture on the earth care. And there's a lot of great stuff there. But as socioculturally we're changing, we're evolving, we're beginning to understand more that we need to lift up the other two ethics. They've been mentioned and the intention has been there from the beginning, but the practice around it wasn't as strong. These days, we're also coming to social permaculture, which some of you may have heard about. This is another representation by Matt Powers of those three interconnecting circles of earth care, people care, and fair share. And you can see permaculture is really at the center of those three circles. You'll again see the three ethics in the middle on this slide, but around it are the 12 modern day principles developed by David Holmgren, who put them out in 2002. He's one of the co-founders of permaculture with Bill Mollison that we've met at the very top of the slideshow, some quotes from him. He's recently passed on. David Holmgren was one of his students, and they worked on permaculture together. This is another take on permaculture, looking at the tree. Again, we use nature as a model. And on the right, you can see one of my favorite forms is the spiral. And we're really looking at developing and helping to catalyze regenerative spirals that lift up and help to digest a lot of the harm that we've done and help to turn systems around to being more regenerative. One of our permaculture elders, Toby Hemingway, who's also passed away, gives us this quote. He says that permaculture gives us a toolkit for moving from a culture of fear and scarcity to one of love and abundance. And that's essentially what we're trying to get at with the essence of permaculture design. And with this toolkit, we'll be showing you a couple of the tools today. And one of the first ones here is looking at the quintessential permaculture chicken. People who've done permaculture education all around the world have looked at this diagram and looking at, you can see on the left, what does a chicken need and what does it yield? What are its products and behaviors and its intrinsic characteristics? And you'll see the magnifying glass as we focused on that element in a system. And here we're putting the chicken, the element in the system, in context with other elements such as a house, a pond, an orchard, yard, pasture, greenhouse, forest, or garden. And then we begin to see the relationships of how the needs of one can be met by other elements in the systems, and the yields of certain of every element in the system can also provide for the needs of other elements in the system. But as well as chickens and ponds and houses, we can also be applying that same permaculture lens to people with our needs and yields, projects with their needs and yields, and places, needs and yields. Really, you could apply it to anything. And when I teach permaculture, social permaculture, that is, one of the core foundational exercises is to apply the permaculture lens to human beings, ultimately ourselves, looking at our needs, our yields, and our behaviors and characteristics. And trust me, this gets pretty chewy. So here's one representation of, you may have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Max Neef did some work and looked at this circular diagram rather than the triangle, which we'll see in a minute, of basic human needs, these fundamental human needs. And Laura was pointing out the other day, somewhat to surprise, that idleness is one of the basic human needs, which we need a little bit more of here. So on the left, we're seeing Maslow's hierarchy of needs in the triangle that some of you may be familiar with the basic physiological needs, followed by in green, the safety needs, and then belonging and love needs, esteem, and self-actualization. So that's one lens that we can use to understand basic human needs, because humans are the basic drivers in the system. And a lot of the systems that we've set up are trying to meet human needs, but not necessarily in very healthy or regenerative ways. And we can also look at this in relationships where the needs and yields of one are tied well into the needs and yields of another person in the system. Another frame that you may have had some exposure to is ikigai, which is the intersection of, in the yellow here, of what you love. Over in the east, we have your what the world needs in pink. In the south, in the light blue, we have what you can be paid for. And over in the west, we have what you're good at. So the passion, the mission, the vocation, and the profession all come together in that heart center of ikigai. And that's what we're developing literacy around and trying to support within ourselves and each other. And it's not an individual sport. If you look at the assemblage of each of these as being an individual person or even a project, how can we create the connectivity of ikigai, or the collective supporting the growth and evolution and healing of each of us towards being able to stand and live more in our ikigai? And the Maslow's hierarchy of needs is, again, a way that we can keep track of those needs at different levels. That triangle of Maslow is here being intertwined with, or a way of representing, spiral dynamics, which some of you may have heard of. And you'll recognize at the bottom in brown, we have the survival instincts in the brown or beige, and then that goes up through the collective colors of purple to the individual of the red and power, and the blue of truth and order, the orange strive drive of strategic enterprise, and then to the green of humanistic egalitarianism, and then the yellow of integral ecological approaches, and ultimately going up to the apex of this triangle of being global holistic, which is what we're working towards. In the traditional spiral view of this, we can see those stages broken down, ultimately going up towards the holistic, universal, and the global vision. But spirals draw from the good aspects of the previous iterations of humans' evolution up through the spiral. It doesn't just leave them behind. It also offers opportunity for us to grow and heal. Because ultimately, what we're going towards, if you can see in the top part of this diagram on the right, the first part of the diagram up to the green represents what is called the first tier of spiral dynamics. And then we're in this transition to individuals in the yellow feeling their way to something beyond the green meme of everybody being the same and equal. And while that's important, some of us have been feeling there's something beyond that. And some of us are swimming towards each other, coming together to find new and creative ways, also using old and good ways to be in mutually supportive, regenerative relationship. Mm-hmm. Now I'm passing it to my colleague, Laura.
Now my task is to go after this eloquent speaker. So I'm Laura, and spiral dynamics is one of my favorite models to kind of see the bigger picture. And I think that we as humans are not so good at seeing the bigger picture, so we are desperately in need of more models. And these models can help us in understanding what kind of DNA we want to design for our network, our regenerative hubs, and for our lives in general. And so we can put our actions and our values and our needs and our goals into this DNA. And how we can see it is that there's this kind of genetic pool of DNA into the network, and then each hub can kind of tap in and select its own DNA and decide how to express their values and needs. And I made a little diagram with these little bees, and I see them as the pollinators of the hub. And the pollinators are very important because they go from hub to hub, and they kind of spread the information throughout the network, and they are helping to accelerate succession and evolution. Another tool we can use is the integral model with the 4 quadrants. Most of us have seen it. Every time we apply it into a different system, it kind of changes, and it can really help us to see this more holistic view of our of this regenerative renaissance that we want to design. Another tool that I found recently is bentoism, which is a model of multidimensional self-interest that tries to escape the limiting short term of individualism. And so, yeah, the bento is basically, well, you know it from this bento box, from the really nice Japanese food. It's also an acronym for Beyond Near-Term Orientation. And it looks like this. It's basically a wider view of our self-interests. And we usually tend to be in the me space, the now me, which is this kind of, this kind of place that craves safety and pleasure and autonomy. And, you know, if we only operate from there, we won't get really far. And so this model helps us to go to the future me on the right, which is the more older and wiser version of ourselves. And then to go to the now us, which is the people we rely on, the people around us, and even the future us, which is the next generation, our children. And this model helps us to going from this kind of gratifying me now place, this short-termism, to gratifying us in the future. And this really cool lady, Elinor Ostrom, also made a model that can help us in designing this DNA. And she focused more on cooperative cooperation in the system, in groups of people. She was an American political economist, and she did a lot of research on governance of the commons. She mainly focused on the common natural resources, but also on information. And she showed that within communities, there are efficient rules that can emerge to ensure cooperation and sustainable and shared resource management. And these are the 8 core principles. The first 6 principles are describing what happens within the group. So it can be within a hub, or I put here a cell because I have a medical background. So it always helps me to put it into that context. And the first is about creating a clear group identity, where you basically say, okay, this is our DNA, this is our sense of purpose, this is our values, our needs, and you make it clear. If you join this group, this is who we are. It needs to be clear. The second principle is about fair distribution of costs and benefits. So if you enter this group, how is the energy that you put in, how is it going to come back to you? How are your needs and yields? Are they fairly distributed within the system? And the third one is inclusive decision making. So if we get into the group, does our voice count? Are we recognized for what we are saying in the group? And then the next 3 are about feedback loops. And so the first one is about monitoring towards goals. And that helps us to see if things are going right, if we're going in the right direction, if we are really going towards our North Star. And if that doesn't happen, then we have some tools in the 5th principle where we can apply feedback and use tools to kind of, for example, incentives or appreciation, these kind of things. And then if it's still something goes wrong, then there's the 3rd step in the feedback loop where we have conflict resolution, which is one of the most challenging aspects in communities. And so the last 2 are about more the interaction with the outside world, so from the hub or the cell or the group of people in the outside. And the 7th is about being recognized by the outside world. Do we have, as a group, do we have a voice within the outside of the system? And then the last one is about all the different levels. How do they organize? So does every cell have its own autonomy, and how is it related to the other cells? There needs to be this coherence, otherwise everything falls apart. So now I'm going to give the voice back to Roberto.
Thank you, Laura. So we talked about a lot of theories, and so the question is, like, how do we bring all of that back into practice? What does it look like and feels like in practice? So this is a little bit what kickstarted us to do our project, which is the Liminal Village. And the definition of liminal has to do with the threshold. So anything that is in transition, and this the moment of transition in practice. So these two circles kind of graphically represent this concept, where then the intersection of them in between the transition could be representing anything that was before and everything that we will have next, everything that has to come. And this is a very important meme for the way that we look at things, because we always want to look at the best of both worlds and not only focusing on one aspect or the other. So Liminal Village is a proto game B place where we actually are experimenting with all of the techniques and frameworks that we talked before, and we also experiment with Web3 technology and see whether, if it's needed, and where it's needed. So this is an overview of the village, and so what we do is we have enough space to host 12 people, sometimes even more, and we create these temporary communities where we teach and experience ourselves on what these frameworks are, and we try to ask the people what it is that you want, what future would you like to create, and bring it forward by actually co-creating it together on the spot. And we do that on a monthly basis or a monthly basis. In fact, we do use the moon as our timer or a progress bar in the sky, which tells us basically where we are into the phases. And since the moon is really, the moon phases everywhere, we can use the same kind of meme to sync up our effort with anybody else around the world that would like to use the same meme. What's the advantage of syncing up like this? We will know at which stage is each group into the co-creation, onto the global co-creation, and we will have a good timing to actually exchange people, the pollinators, as Lara was saying. So the integral human is actually a way to boil down that integral theory into something that is easily graspable. So what we ask the people to do when they come here is to say, okay, do you have a project for your personal development or some target for your physical plane, something that you can give to the local community, or some workshop, or some where can you help? How can you make the place become better? How can you regenerate the place? And can you do something? Do you have a project that is valid for everybody else? So a completely altruistic project. And of course, it's very difficult to balance these three aspects, but it's an ask. We're asking, at least you can realize if you can balance and if you are closer to becoming an integral human. So the people come and they bring their gifts. So if you know how to do something, you can teach another. If you always wish that you could become something, that's the moment in which you can make the transformation. So it's really the space where you can make the transition also on the personal level, the personal regeneration. And in terms of coordination tool, we did try to use some tokens, Web3, but actually we realized that maybe it was a little bit of an overkill for a community that is of human and are localized. So actually something as simple as a board, and in this case a Miro board, would be enough to actually coordinate at the local level. Now, Jillian was explaining some of the permaculture tools, and one of the tools that is very dear to me is the zoning tool, where you basically look at the space depending on how often do you visit it. So in our case, Liminal Village would be zone 0, so the house where you live, and then the zone 1 on the permaculture would be like just where you go to pick up your herbs, something you can go in your bathrobe, you can say, because you can visit daily, and then it just expands outward to something you visit less and less and less, back to zone 5, where you have natural environment and you can go to observe and learn. If we actually look at our project, we also can apply the same zoning diagram to see, okay, what is in our zone 1? Because we are one of the many regenerative projects, But our insight is like maybe we can create a localized network that is very tightly close, linked to each other, is interdependent, and see that is new economic models and activities can actually raise. So this is our zone 1 that we created together with other families. There are for bringing 24 kids into and raise them together. So we have created a kindergarten where we crowdfunded the yurt as a common space. And to understand what I'm talking about is that that is zone 1, is that we visited, every family visited twice a day to bring the kid and to pick up the kid. So that's one function, but what other function can it have? Well, if anybody of the family, anyone of the family has a need and somebody else can answer that need, then this becomes the place of exchange. You bring your kids and you bring your eggs, and you bring your kids and you pick up the eggs, and then you bring your eggs to your parents that you see in the afternoon. So you see, by looking at regenerative and regeneration and zone network, you can actually create new economic systems directly next to your house. So actually an invitation for you to understand and think in zones and see where the biggest influence or the biggest potential it is for your own network. Anyway, the kindergarten has become a center for learning, also not just for the kids, but also for the parents. So there is more function that gets stuck when you actually try to raise a community, to build a community. And mind you, this is not a real community. This is diffuse communities. Everybody's going to his own place. You don't actually have to live with each other, but you can actually satisfy each other's needs together. At Zone 2, which is with Visit Weekly, we just recently purchased a brick factory from the 1900. And with that, we actually have a huge opportunity because we have about 6,000 cubic meters of building permit. And now what we want to do is to create a bigger node within the network that is going to be the main center of production of the technologies that are going to be required to generate new nodes again. And we're also very proud to have been accepted into the Region Civics Alliance, which is a group of 13 eco-villages around the globe that together are investigating ways to use Web3 technologies to track and fund and help the co-creation of eco-villages. So right now I'd like to talk about one of the concepts that we have, which is, sure, we can link all the existing eco-villages. This is pockets of sustainability that are now there, and they need to be connected. But if you're all sparse around the globe, it's very difficult to create a viable economic activity across them. So we suggest that what we need to do is that each of the villages, each of the existing knowledge center, they would start to create small cluster or satellites around them to satisfy specific needs that they have. And that's why we're talking about the Regenerative Hub Toolkit, or a blueprint for a Regenerative Hub. And for being regenerative, we are using the toolkit of permaculture to actually look and design it. But we're going to do an extra step. We need to make this as simple and as cheap as possible to allow anybody with a need for a community or a sense of the need for the community to actually quickly kickstart one in their area. And we do this using automation. So as I said, it's not back to nature, it's forward to nature. So here we have our new Zone 0, which is actually 3D printed with locally sourced material. So what you're seeing here is a house that is 3D printed with clay, and it has this. This is the printer that just goes around and prints it, and it also prints these pockets. These are air pockets, and these are pockets where you can put additional waste material from the rice production to completely insulate the house. So you can get a house like this built up in a week, and is with the maximum energy efficiency with no use of material. So if the network owns this machine, we can actually keep replicating and move around. And you're not living in a box, you're living in something that looks pretty cool and futuristic. On the zone 1, that's where you're going to take your old veggies. And of course, having to guard a field like this and to maintain it and to have the knowledge on how to do that, that scares a lot of people away. And yet again, we can actually train people by using machinery. So here's a FarmBot, is an open source project, and we are using it to also demonstrate how machines can actually help nature. And we can learn, for the people that know nothing, what the different vegetables are, what the different pattern they are, what kind of pests they like it, and so on. So there is a lot of education that come, but for the time being, the machine is taking care for your garden. And once you learn and once it's established, maybe you can move on to the next location. And again, another open source project is the Global Village Construction Set, which is basically consisting of a lot of open source machines that if you do have the right machine, you can build yourself with a fraction of the costs that it would actually take if you would go buy it. And they won't have that planned obsolescence embedded into it. So you would actually keep it for much, much longer time. And with this machine, actually, we're researching a fully integrated planting system that goes from the bedding to the installation of the irrigation and the mulching, to the cropping, and even to the distribution to the market. So you have 4 machines that are actually controlled, can be actually operated by 3 humans. So we don't even need to use the fossil fuel to actually have the maximum available throughput of vegetable with the minimum amount of effort. And that's what we're looking for, right? And we can also use the machines for doing more traditional agriculture, enhanced by the knowledge that is acquired by the permaculture and the other kind of regenerative agriculture patterns, and ultimately have a food forest where you could where you don't have to do anything, you can just walk in and pick up the fruits, having an entire system that sustains itself without use of pesticide, without use of fertilizer, as forests do. And of course, the zone 5 is where you see what nature does, what's going on out there. Is there anything changing? Do we have to sound an alarm? And how is nature regenerating itself? That's the wisdom of the highest of the technology, which is nature. To the permaculture zoning, we're actually adding also zone 6. Zone 6, the metaverse. So that's the place where you can, the information, where in the regenerative hub, you can actually put on your VR goggles and enter that information space and see what kind of issues there are around the world, see what's needed in the nearby hubs, so where you can actually travel as a pollinator, and where all the knowledge of all the hubs is being collected and shared across the whole hubs and the entire human civilization. So I see actually Web3 as having a killer application as a human information system. That's where we store and we can see what's going on and where we can intervene. And sure, of course, if, for instance, we are tracking the needs, we can actually incentivize people from around the world to submit solution or help out, and by sharing the knowledge or sharing the tools that are that required to actually satisfy their need. And the regenerative hubs network would be one of such network that we can track the needs and the offers so that we can actually use that for communication. And the idea is that for every hub that is already there and is already existing, that they actually, by joining the network, they focus on the self-replication. They focus on creating new hubs around them, so that then they can have a much easier interaction that actually won't even require the technology at some point to be able to perform the exchange, because you have the trust, which is one of the highest human technologies. But so when we're talking about such a digital system, then we need to start talking operating system. So this is one of our proposal, is the Holonic Earth operating system that is indeed instructing who and how much is regenerating, and giving access to the people, to most of what the network is able to produce, to the people that have shown highest performance in regeneration. Why Holonic? Because in the end, it starts from ourselves, and it's all about establishing relationship with others. And so if we see this as a concentric circle of a cell of a higher and higher order social organism, that maybe in your congregation, everybody's focusing on a specific task, while the rest of the congregation is able to provide for everything you need while you do so. And each of these hollands we can have zones also attached to them. And the zones are like lenses that you can put. So who am I close to in terms of distance, or who am I close to in terms of appreciation, or time that was spent on a project, or trust or commitment. So you can see the world through these different lenses, and you would see different spaces and different networks kind of arising. Ultimately, it is all about human coordination. The tokens that we use is the most decentralized, in a way, human coordination system, but right now is not really doing what we wish. It has got us so far, but I think it is time that we really change the paradigm. And Web3 technology is able to bring us from old paradigm to a paradigm that looks and feels much more like an ecology, a team of teams in a way, where all the relationship between the people actually represents the organism or the organizational structure within the community. And that brings us to globalization, that is networks that are localized, but also globalized. And whatever it's possible to share, the cosmolocalism, information is shared across the entire globe, while hard things is shared very, very locally. So what kind of information, what kind of tools we can use in this sort of society? We came up with something very simple that we can explain, which is the regenerative business model. So, business models, with money, you can just purchase your product. That's our current economic system. Well, we can use Web3 to do other things. So, for instance, here is some money to get some apples. If we now use blockchain, we can actually still purchase that apple, but we can make sure that that action of purchasing adds to that purchase a regenerative step, which is planting a new tree and giving you a share of the tree, so that in 20 years' time, where the tree is abundant, just by buying an apple today, in 20 years' time, you might actually not have to pay for apples anymore, because that's what the tree that you own is giving. So you can see that such simple modification to our ways of operating, to our monetary system, to our social economic system, might create regenerative loops that basically create this kind of like regenerative machine, or perpetual motion regenerative machine, that is creating itself, creating more places for more people working on regeneration, which creates more places and creates more abundance that is shared with everybody that is focused on regeneration. So ultimately, if you're really not sold about this, maybe this sign might help you take the decision. If you're focusing on abundance rather than scarcity, if you're focusing on sharing rather than hoarding, we might actually have a promise for a early retirement plan, where all the effort you're putting right now into regeneration is gonna, through Web3 technology, is gonna come back to you later on. And you will actually be able to retire, as in the system is going to be able to give you everything you need so that you can really focus on what you truly believe that is important. So that's a call for action for everyone. If you are willing to start a regenerative hub, or you already have a regenerative hub and you're stewarding it, or you would like to actually come and be the steward of one of the hub, you're a digital nomad and you're very interested in coming and learning some things, and then bring the knowledge and information to the next one and keep exchanging this information at the human level. If you're a game A investor, and that's including the fiat, but also the crypto, which is the tokens that we now have replicated the previous system into a completely new technology. If you have that capacity and you want to regeneration, then we're looking for you. But also if you're a game B investor, an investor that can put its own time, its own resources, its own unused land or assets, knowledge, machine, everything you can give access to, that's also a valid investment that is going to work towards that early retirement I was talking about. So if you're interested in any of these, please go to regenerativa.io. You can see a very nice video we put together as a sign up for the Region Civics Alliance. And have a look. It really shows our visions for 2030, how it's going to be and feel like. And maybe, we'll get back in touch. And what can happen is that you become the mayor of the regeneration in your own municipality. You could be the first mover to actually say regeneration is what we need, and it's the biggest task of our time. So for now, that's a dream that I would just leave you with this picture, which kind of represent a little bit of this shared dream and shared vision, where every vision matters as long as we are connecting with each other, regenerating ourselves, our human system, and the entire planet with it. Thank you very much. This is the link again, and you are gonna say something?
Yeah, thanks, Roberto. We have a Robert and a Roberto here. If you can put us back over onto to seeing us, hosts. Yeah, just a couple of quick words. We'll maybe have time for a question or two, but I just really want to acknowledge the intergenerational relationships that we've got going on here. And it's one of the reasons that I'm here. This is kind of like my home away from home, Zone Zero. Indeed, I've worked all around the world, but all of us are here investing in Liminal, but not just in Liminal, but as a space that's going to become more spaces. And what is the pattern language here around regeneration, biomimicry, using permaculture, and other things as tools. And it's really an honor to work with Laura and Roberto. They've invested their life savings creating this location and really investing in their lives in this journey. And that's what it's going to take for us to do this. So pass it back over to the host and see if there's any questions from the audience.
Great. Thanks so much, Jillian, Roberto, Robert, and Laura. This is an amazing presentation. I think one of the things that really stuck out, like the meme that stuck out to me, is that money doesn't grow on, or trees don't grow on money. I think that really like puts it like just money is usually not enough. It needs to be like backed and have like the forward thinking to like be progressive. So I also really like that it was always looking forward. One of the things that really stood out to me were the organic structures, both in what was being built with the open source housing and everything else. As we build, and like even spiral dynamics, a lot of the stuff is very like organic in the structure. With the fields, is that like intentional that everything kind of like follows the cell shape? Is it just kind of like the nature that has been arising from connection, or how like circles are very different from like what we see in the standard world, right? Everything's in a box and very hard ridges, but all of even the fields and the design are in circles. Is there intention behind the circular design?
Oh, we didn't even get to the part of the presentation that's about hold-ons, but I'll let Roberto answer that. Yeah, we're a lot about circles, and but other aspects of sacred geometry as well.
Yeah, there's a biomimicry. It's very fundamental because, I mean, this, as I said, nature is the highest of technologies. I mean, if you look at it with a technological lens, it's insane what it can actually do. The adaptation capabilities there, and there is so much knowledge embedded in the DNA that we need to be able to master the understanding of how nature works, and then try to create human systems that are actually aligned with nature, rather than just against it, just take it all out because it's handy for us, right? So we need to focus on ecosystem approach, biomimicry, and that's really if it's not aligned with nature, then we need to really reconsider if we're doing the right thing, because nature got us here. So can we do better than that? Really?
Yeah, thank you so much. Also, you guys have a Gitcoin grant, is that right? Is that way that people can help support Liminal Village?
We didn't do a grant yet, but we will at some point. I think there is a Liminal DAO that is actually doing that. We are aligned with the way of thinking, but yeah, we haven't yet. I just saw the presentation yesterday, and it's pretty cool. Actually, it's a bit scary how much aligned we are. So, but it's that's pretty much magical nature, I guess, as well. So, or this is the force of an idea. The time has come as well.
Yeah. And with the Regen Civics Alliance, we're one of the 13 teams that were chosen, and we are organizing to do a fundraising, and that we're working with Seeds and Haifa, and it's a good exercise for us to look at the ecology of those programs. A lot of people have invested a lot there, because we're in a path of perpetual education of how do we bring ourselves as whole people. We're doing also our personal growth work as we go along. At how do we learn to be increasingly more capable to be in generative relationship with each other. I'll just add a thing about the circles is, that's one of the, I guess you would say if you were going to put a symbol for the green meme of spiral dynamic, it's everybody being in a circle with equal voice. But it does lend itself to holons, but also being in holocratic relationship with each other. And so we're really looking at having a diversity of types of projects that are able to be in generative relationship with each other across various boundaries and membranes. So it's an ecology that we're growing over time and living in now. It's not just later.
Yeah, I think even as you say, like the geometry, there was like the hierarchy of needs and Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and then you brought it back to the more organic man-filled max circles as well. So I think you do a great job of saying that a group is very organic as well. So I think teach, build, empower, and like growing these different communities is a very powerful message. And also it's not just one village, right? There's 13 villages currently. Is that right?
Yeah, and that's just that's with the Regen Civics Alliance. Here in the Italian landscape, there's a number of communities in the various zones that we're working with, but indeed Robert works with various projects and organizations all around the world. I just want to be clear, that's one articulation is through the Regen Civics Alliance, and there's a tremendous amount of information there on the internet if people want to take a look and see what they're doing. And I also will say, like, what we're going to go into right now is a debrief from this, and the work that putting together this really helped and pushed us to continue to articulate and refine our vision and how we articulate and communicate it. And so we're going immediately into feedback loop around this. So thanks for the opportunity and holding it down here for the Regen Day.
Thank you so much, Jillian. Yeah, speaking of what's going on in Italy, Matteo Tambusi is up next, talking about Spaghetti ETH Nation. I believe it's all about regenerative communities in Italy. Are you there, Matteo?
Perfect.
I am, and I'm also from this is actually a place that I wanted to connect to Roberto at a certain. Ciao, Roberto. Nice to see you. And I'm also honored to speak after you. This is Stonoven House. It's an art residency in the Italian Alps between Piedmont and France. And it's check it out at stoneovenhouse.com. It's a very, very interesting place to spend some time at.
Great. Yeah, great. Look forward to connecting more. We'll stay here for your presentation. Great link.
Thank you.